The elevator doors slid shut, and I watched my husband of 5 years walk away from me forever. What Kevin didn't know as he strutted through that marble lobby with his mistress on his arm was that every camera capturing his betrayal belonged to me. Every security guard who witnessed his humiliation worked for me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Even the golden nameplate gleaming above the reception desk bore my family's legacy. In 30 minutes, Kevin Walsh would discover that the woman he'd just abandoned owned every brick, every thread of Egyptian cotton, and every crystal chandelier in the Grandview Metropolitan. But first, let me take you back to where this story really begins. Portland's autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Hillside District penthouse as I carefully folded Kevin's shirts into his weekend suitcase. After 5 years of marriage, I knew exactly how he liked everything arranged. Business shirts on the left, casual wear on the right, ties rolled precisely to avoid wrinkles. It was our 5th wedding anniversary weekend, and Kevin had planned what he called the perfect getaway at the Grandview Metropolitan downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me. My husband was taking me to celebrate our anniversary at a hotel I owned, though he had no idea. As far as Kevin knew, I was simply Rachel Thompson Walsh, the fortunate recipient of a substantial family trust fund who spent her days volunteering at art galleries and attending charity luncheons. He saw me as his beautiful, wealthy wife who provided the financial stability his consulting firm needed to thrive. What he didn't see was the woman who inherited the largest hotel chain on the West Coast at 21 and had been quietly expanding it ever since. Kevin burst through the bedroom door, his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing wildly as he spoke to someone about quarterly projections. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his Tom Ford suit impeccable, and his smile as practiced as always. Even, during what should have been an intimate moment preparing for our anniversary, he couldn't disconnect from work, or what I thought was work. "Victoria, I need those numbers by Monday," he said into the phone, not even glancing in my direction. "The Henderson account depends on it." Victoria Hayes. I'd heard that name more frequently in recent months. Kevin's new business associate, a striking blonde who'd joined Walsh & Associates 6 months ago. According to Kevin, she was brilliant with investments, had connections throughout the Pacific Northwest, and was essential to his firm's expansion plans. According to my growing suspicions, she was something else entirely. I zipped his suitcase, closed and set it by the bedroom door. "Ready for our romantic weekend?" I asked, injecting just enough playfulness into my voice to mask the uncertainty that had been gnawing at me. Kevin ended his call and finally looked at me, though his attention felt distracted, almost obligatory. "Absolutely. 5 years, Rachel. Can you believe it?" I could believe it, but lately I'd been wondering if he could. The late-night calls that took him into his home office with the door locked. The weekend business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he'd grown distant during our conversations, as if his mind was always somewhere else, someone else. "The Grandview Metropolitan," he continued, straightening his cufflinks. "I spared no expense. Presidential suite, champagne service, dinner at their Michelin-starred restaurant. Only the best for my incredible wife." The words should have warmed my heart, but something felt rehearsed about them. Kevin had always been charming, but lately, his charm felt like a performance rather than genuine affection. Still, I pushed. Those thoughts aside, this was our anniversary weekend. Maybe the intimate setting would help us reconnect. The drive downtown took us through Portland's tree-lined streets, past the coffee shops and bookstores that gave the city its character. Kevin drove his Mercedes with one hand, the other holding his phone as he fired off text messages at red lights. I watched the familiar scenery pass by, each landmark carrying memories of the empire I'd built in secret. There was the corner where I'd stood at 19, fresh out of college, learning that my grandmother's will had left me controlling interest in Grandview hotels and resorts. The law office where I'd spent countless hours with attorneys, understanding the full scope of my inheritance. The bank where I'd sat across from loan officers, convincing them to finance my expansion plans while pretending to be just another young socialite with more money than sense. Kevin knew none of this. When we met at a charity fundraiser 7 years ago, I'd been deliberately vague about my background. I told him I came from family money, which was true enough. I let him assume I was a typical trust fund recipient, living off interest and dividends while pursuing frivolous hobbies. It was easier that way. Men like Kevin were attracted to wealth, but they preferred their wives to be beautiful accessories rather than business rivals. "Tyler's meeting us for drinks tomorrow night," Kevin mentioned casually as we pulled into the Grandview Metropolitan's circular drive. "I hope you don't mind mixing a little business with pleasure." Tyler Reed, Kevin's business partner since college. Another charming, ambitious man who saw relationships as strategic alliances rather than emotional connections. I'd never warmed to Tyler, sensing something calculating beneath his friendly exterior. But Kevin valued his opinion above almost everyone else's, so I'd learned to tolerate him. "Of course not," I replied, though something about the timing bothered me. Why would Kevin schedule business meetings during our anniversary weekend? The valet approached Kevin's side of the car, and I watched my husband's demeanor shift into what I privately called his public persona. Confident smile, firm handshake, the kind of easy charm that made people want to trust him immediately. As the valet handed him the claim ticket, Kevin slipped him a $20 bill with a flourish, ensuring the young man would remember him fondly. Robert Chen, the hotel's general manager, approached us personally as we entered the lobby. Robert had worked for Grandview Hotels for 12 years, starting as a front desk clerk and earning his way up through dedication and exceptional service. He knew exactly who I was, of course, but we'd established protocols years ago for situations like this. In public, especially around Kevin, I was simply Mrs. Walsh, another wealthy guest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mr. and Mrs. Walsh," Robert said with professional warmth, extending his hand to Kevin first. "Welcome to the Grandview Metropolitan. We're honored to host your anniversary celebration." Kevin preened under the attention, clearly pleased that the general manager had personally greeted us. "Thank you, Robert. I've heard incredible things about your presidential suite." "I believe you'll find it exceeds expectations," Robert replied smoothly. "Mrs. Walsh, we've prepared a selection of champagnes for your arrival, and Chef Morrison has designed a special anniversary menu for this evening." As Robert spoke, I caught the subtle signs that only I would recognize. The way he positioned himself to keep me in his line of sight, the discreet hand signal he gave to the front desk staff, the security guard near the elevator who nodded almost imperceptibly in my direction. My staff was acknowledging my presence while maintaining the carefully constructed illusion that I was simply another guest. The presidential suite occupied the entire top floor of the hotel, offering panoramic views of Portland's skyline and the Columbia River beyond. Kevin toured the space like he owned it, commenting on the Italian marble, the hand-picked artwork, and the bottle of Dom Perignon, chilling in a silver bucket. What he didn't know was that I'd personally overseen every detail of this suite's renovation 2 years ago, from the custom furniture to the 24-karat gold fixtures in the bathroom. "This is incredible," Kevin said, wrapping his arms around me, as we stood on the private balcony overlooking the city. 5 years, Rachel. Here's to 5 more. He kissed me then, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that my suspicions were unfounded. This was the man I'd fallen in love with at that charity gala. Ambitious, yes, but also passionate about building something meaningful. We'd talked for hours that first night about our dreams, our goals, our shared vision of success. I'd been careful not to reveal too much about my own achievements, but I genuinely believed we could build a life together based on mutual respect and love. Now, standing in a hotel suite that I owned while my husband celebrated his thoughtfulness in bringing me here, I wondered if that young woman had been naive. Had Kevin ever seen me as an equal partner, or had I always been the golden goose whose eggs funded his ambitions? "Let's get ready for dinner," Kevin suggested, checking his Rolex. "Our reservation is in an hour." As Kevin showered, I stood, in the suite's living area, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening darkness. From this height, I could see 3 other Grandview properties scattered throughout Portland's skyline. Hotels I owned, managed, and had personally transformed into the most sought-after accommodations in the Pacific Northwest. Properties that generated millions in revenue annually, employing hundreds of people who looked to me for leadership and vision. Yet the man in the next room, the man I'd shared my bed and my life with for 5 years, saw me as nothing more than a decorative accessory to his own success. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Martinez, my best friend since college, and one of the few people who knew my complete story. "How's the anniversary weekend? Still haven't told him the truth?" I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Not yet. Maybe this weekend." But even as I sent the reply, I wondered if I'd ever find the courage to reveal who I really was. Kevin had fallen in love with his idea of me, not the actual me. How would he react if he discovered that his wife was actually his professional superior? That the woman he saw as financially dependent was, in fact, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region? Kevin emerged from the bathroom, looking devastating in his charcoal suit and burgundy tie. Whatever doubts I had about our relationship, there was no denying his physical appeal. At 35, he maintained the athletic build that had first caught my attention, and his confidence was undeniably attractive. "You look beautiful," he said, taking in my black cocktail dress and diamond earrings. The earrings had been my grandmother's, passed down along with her business empire, but Kevin had always assumed they were just expensive gifts from my family trust. Dinner at the Riverside Terrace was everything Kevin had promised. Chef Morrison had outdone himself with a 7-course tasting menu paired with wines from Oregon's finest vineyards. The restaurant occupied the hotel's top floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the Columbia River and the city beyond. Every table was filled with well-dressed diners, and the soft jazz trio in the corner created the perfect ambiance for romance. Kevin was at his most charming throughout dinner, regaling me with stories from his latest business deals and asking about my volunteer work at the Portland Art Museum. To any observer, we appeared to be the perfect couple celebrating a milestone anniversary, successful, attractive, clearly in love. But I noticed things that others might miss. The way Kevin's attention drifted whenever his phone buzzed, how he excused himself twice during dinner to take calls he claimed were urgent. The fact that he seemed more interested in being seen at this exclusive restaurant than in having intimate conversation with me. "I have a surprise for you tomorrow," Kevin announced as we shared dessert, a decadent chocolate soufflé that was the restaurant's signature dish. Something special for our anniversary. "What kind of surprise?" I asked, though something in his tone made me uneasy. "You'll have to wait and see," he replied with that practiced smile. "But I think you'll find it life-changing." Life-changing. The words echoed in my mind as we returned to our suite. Kevin's surprises had always been thoughtful but conventional. Jewelry, spa weekends, surprise trips to wine country. What could he have planned that he considered life-changing? That night, as Kevin slept beside me in the presidential suite's king-sized bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Outside, Portland's nightlife hummed quietly, and I could hear the distant sound of the Columbia River flowing toward the ocean. This hotel, this suite, this entire building represented everything I'd worked to achieve since inheriting my grandmother's legacy. Yet I felt more isolated than ever. The woman who owned this empire was lying next to a man who saw her as a beautiful burden. The entrepreneur who employed hundreds of people was pretending to be nothing more than a wealthy socialite. The heiress, who had transformed her inheritance into something even greater, was hiding behind a facade that grew more suffocating every day. As dawn broke over Portland, painting the Columbia River in shades of gold and rose, I made a decision. This anniversary weekend would be the last time I pretended to be someone I wasn't. Whether Kevin's surprise was the romantic gesture he claimed or something else entirely, I would finally tell him the truth about who I really was. I had no idea that before the weekend was over, Kevin would reveal a truth of his own. One that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our marriage and set in motion a chain of events that would change both our lives forever. But first, I had to get through one more day of being Rachel Walsh, the grateful wife who had no idea she was sleeping in a bed she owned, in a hotel she'd built, surrounded by staff who answered to her alone. The irony was about to become much more complicated. Saturday morning arrived with Portland's typical autumn drizzle, the kind of gentle rain that made the city feel intimate and mysterious. I woke to find Kevin already dressed in his running gear, checking his fitness tracker with the dedication of someone preparing for a marathon. Through the presidential suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, the Columbia River looked gray and restless under the overcast sky. "Going for your morning run?" I asked, stretching beneath the Egyptian cotton sheets that I'd personally selected when designing this suite. 20-mile loop along the waterfront, Kevin replied without looking up from his phone. Need to clear my head before the big day ahead. Something about his tone struck me as odd. Kevin was always focused on fitness, but 20 miles seemed excessive for a leisurely anniversary weekend. More concerning was the phrase, "big day ahead." Yesterday he'd mentioned a surprise, but now it sounded like he had an entire agenda planned. "What time will you be back?" I asked, sitting up and reaching for the silk robe draped across the nearby chair. "Probably around noon," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Why don't you enjoy the spa? Get a massage, facial, whatever makes you happy." My treat. The casual dismissal in his voice made my stomach tighten. This wasn't the tone of a loving husband encouraging his wife to relax. It was the tone of someone who needed me occupied and out of the way. After Kevin left, I stood on the suite's private balcony with my morning coffee, watching him emerge from the hotel's main entrance 30 floors below. Instead of turning toward the waterfront running path, he walked to the parking garage. My pulse quickened as I saw him get into his Mercedes rather than beginning his supposed 20-mile run. I grabbed my phone and called Lisa Martinez, the one person who knew all my secrets and wouldn't judge me for what I was about to do. "Rachel, it's barely 8 in the morning," Lisa answered with a yawn. "This better be good." "I need you to do something for me," I said, still watching Kevin's car pull out of the garage. "Can you track a license plate?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. As an investigative journalist for the Portland Tribune, she had resources and connections that most people couldn't access. More importantly, she'd been warning me about Kevin's behavior for months, noticing changes in his patterns that I'd been too close to see clearly. "What's going on, Rachel? You sound stressed." I told her about Kevin's supposed 20-mile run and his actual departure in his car, about the mysterious surprise he'd planned and his insistence that I spend the morning at the spa, about the growing feeling that something wasn't right with our anniversary celebration. "Text me his license plate number," Lisa said, her voice now fully alert. "Give me 30 minutes. While I waited for Lisa's callback, I did something I'd never done before. I accessed the hotel's security system from my phone. As the owner of Grandview Hotels, I had administrative access to all our property's surveillance networks. Within minutes, I was watching Kevin's car on traffic cameras throughout downtown Portland. He wasn't heading toward any running trails. Instead, he drove directly to the Pearl District, one of Portland's most upscale neighborhoods. My heart sank as I watched him park outside Provence, an intimate French bistro known for its private dining rooms and romantic ambiance. This wasn't a restaurant where you grabbed a quick breakfast before a run. This was where you took someone special for a secret rendezvous. My phone rang exactly 30 minutes later. "Rachel, you need to sit down," Lisa said without preamble. I remained standing on the balcony, gripping the railing as she continued. "Kevin's car is registered to Walsh and Associates, but the insurance is paid by a company called Cascade Investments. I did some digging on Cascade, and it's owned by someone named Victoria Hayes." The name hit me like a physical blow. Victoria. Hayes, Kevin's supposed business associate, the brilliant investment advisor who'd joined his firm 6 months ago. The woman whose name I'd been hearing more and more frequently in his phone conversations. "There's more," Lisa continued. "Victoria Hayes purchased a condominium in the Pearl District 3 months ago. Penthouse unit, paid in cash, $1.7 million. I'm sending you the address now." The address that appeared on my phone screen was 2 blocks from Provence, the restaurant where Kevin had just arrived. The coincidence was too significant to ignore. "Lisa, I need you to come downtown," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Bring your camera equipment. I think I'm about to discover exactly what Kevin's anniversary surprise really is." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she replied. "Rachel, whatever you find today, remember that you're stronger than you think, and you're definitely stronger than Kevin deserves." After Lisa hung up, I sat in the suite's living area, staring at my reflection in the dark television screen. The woman looking back at me appeared calm and composed, but inside, my mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. I'd built an empire by trusting my instincts and following evidence to logical conclusions. In business, I never made decisions based on emotions or wishful thinking. I gathered facts, analyzed data, and acted on reality rather than hope. Yet in my personal life, I'd been ignoring red flags for months, choosing to believe Kevin's explanations, rather than trusting what my gut had been telling me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, sitting in a hotel I owned, preparing to investigate whether my husband was betraying me with another woman. I had the resources to discover the truth. Within hours, yet I'd been living in willful blindness for who knew how long. Lisa arrived at the hotel wearing dark jeans, a black jacket, and a camera bag slung over her shoulder. Her expression was grim as she entered the presidential suite, taking in the luxury that surrounded us. "Every time I see how you live, I remember why you should have dumped Kevin years ago," she said bluntly. "A man who doesn't appreciate having a wife who owns half of downtown Portland doesn't deserve that wife." "He doesn't know I own anything," I reminded her. "As far as Kevin's concerned, I'm just a trust fund baby who spends her days shopping and volunteering." "Which is exactly the problem," Lisa replied, setting up her telephoto lens by the window. "You've been hiding who you really are for so long that you've forgotten your own worth." From the suite's balcony, we had a clear view of the Pearl District. Using Lisa's professional camera equipment, we could see the entrance to Provence and most of the surrounding street. What we discovered over the next hour confirmed my worst fears and revealed depths of deception I hadn't imagined. Kevin wasn't alone at the restaurant. Through the telephoto lens, we watched him embrace a stunning blonde woman outside Provence's entrance. She was tall, elegant, and wore designer clothes that screamed success and sophistication. Even from 30 floors away, her body language spoke of intimacy and familiarity. This wasn't a business meeting between colleagues. This was a romantic rendezvous between lovers. "That's Victoria Hayes," I said, recognizing her from the headshot on Kevin's company website. "His business associate." "Business associate, my ass," Lisa muttered, snapping photos as Kevin and Victoria walked hand in hand into the restaurant. "Look at how comfortable they are together. This isn't new, Rachel. They've been doing this for a while." Lisa was right. Kevin's posture around Victoria was completely different from how he'd been with me lately. With her, he appeared relaxed, animated, genuinely engaged. The contrast to his distracted, almost obligatory behavior during our anniversary dinner was stark and painful. "There's something else," Lisa said, lowering the camera to look at me directly. "I did more research on Victoria Hayes this morning. She's not just some random investment advisor. She's the daughter of Marcus Hayes, who owns Hayes Development Group. They're Grandview Hotel's biggest competitor in the Pacific Northwest." The revelation hit me like ice water. Marcus Hayes had been trying to acquire Grandview properties for years, making increasingly aggressive offers that I'd consistently refused. His development company specialized in converting historic hotels into luxury condominiums, destroying the character and heritage that made properties like mine special. "You think Victoria is using Kevin to get information about my hotels?" I asked, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they were true. "I think Victoria is using Kevin, period," Lisa replied. "The question is whether Kevin knows he's being used or if he's actively participating in whatever scheme they've cooked up." We spent the next 2 hours documenting everything. Lisa photographed Kevin and Victoria leaving the restaurant together, their obvious intimacy captured in devastating detail. We followed them through the telephoto lens as they walked to Victoria's penthouse building, watched them enter together, and confirmed that Kevin had no intention of returning to the hotel anytime soon. At noon, Kevin texted me. "Run took longer than expected. Meeting Tyler for lunch to discuss business. Back by 3 for our surprise." The casual lie felt like a slap across the face. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was insulting my intelligence with his fictional explanations. "What do you want to do?" Lisa asked, packing up her camera equipment. I looked around the presidential suite at the luxury that Kevin thought he'd provided for our anniversary celebration. Every detail in this room reflected my taste, my business acumen, my success. The art on the walls had been chosen by me. The view from these windows showcased a city where I'd built something meaningful and lasting. The champagne, chilling in the silver bucket, bore the label of a vineyard I'd discovered and supported when it was just starting out. "I want to know everything," I said. "How long this has been going on, what Victoria really wants, and exactly what kind of surprise Kevin has planned for this afternoon." Lisa made several phone calls while I used my access to hotel security systems and business databases. Within an hour, we'd assembled a timeline that painted a clear picture of betrayal and deception. Victoria Hayes had indeed joined Walsh & Associates 6 months ago, but not as a mere employee. According to incorporation documents that Lisa uncovered, she was actually a 50% partner in the firm. Kevin had restructured his business, giving Victoria equal ownership in exchange for what appeared to be substantial financial investment. More damning was the discovery of email exchanges between Kevin and Victoria that Lisa found through her investigative contacts. The messages, dating back 8 months, revealed both a passionate affair and a calculated business strategy. Victoria had been feeding Kevin information about hotel acquisition opportunities, encouraging him to pursue deals that would ultimately benefit Hayes Development Group. Most shocking of all was an email thread from 2 weeks ago discussing their Portland project. The messages were cryptic, but the implications were clear. Kevin and Victoria were planning something that would happen during our anniversary weekend, something they referred to as the final phase. "Rachel, look at this," Lisa said, showing me her laptop screen. "Victoria purchased airline tickets yesterday. 2 first-class seats to the Cayman Islands departing tomorrow morning." My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence Lisa had assembled. Hotel acquisition proposals that Kevin had tried to convince me to consider. Financial documents showing massive loans taken against Walsh and Associates. Insurance policies. And business valuations that suggested someone was preparing for a major liquidation. The truth crystallized with horrible clarity. Kevin wasn't just having an affair with Victoria Hayes. He was planning to disappear with her, taking whatever assets he could access from our marriage and his business. The anniversary surprise he'd mentioned wasn't a romantic gesture. It was his exit strategy. "He's going to ask you to sign something," Lisa said grimly. "Probably some kind of financial document disguised as a romantic gesture. Power of attorney, property transfers, access to your accounts." I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and looking down at the city I'd helped shape through my business decisions. Somewhere out there, my husband was with another woman, planning to betray not just our marriage, but everything I'd worked to build. "He has no idea who he's dealing with," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. I turned back to face her, feeling something shift inside me. The naive woman who'd been hiding her success behind a facade of helplessness was disappearing. In her place emerged the CEO who'd turned a regional hotel chain into a Pacific Northwest empire. The entrepreneur who'd outmaneuvered competitors and negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The granddaughter who'd honored her family's legacy by building something even greater than what she'd inherited. "Kevin thinks he's married to a trust fund baby who doesn't understand business," I said. "He has no idea that his wife owns the building he's standing in, employs more people than he's ever met, and has resources he can't even imagine." "So what's the plan?" Lisa asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. "We're going to give Kevin exactly what he wants," I replied. "His anniversary surprise, his grand finale, his moment of truth. But first, we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with." I picked up the hotel phone and dialed Robert Chen's direct number. "Mrs. Walsh," Robert answered immediately. "How can I assist you?" "Robert, this is going to sound unusual, but I need you to prepare for some guests this afternoon. Specifically, I need you to arrange for certain individuals to be present in the lobby at 3 o'clock. "Of course, ma'am. What type of gathering should I prepare for?" I looked at Lisa, who was grinning as she realized what I was planning. "The kind where everyone finally learns the truth," I said. Over the next 2 hours, Lisa and I orchestrated what would become the most dramatic afternoon of Kevin's life. While he was with Victoria, planning whatever deception they had in mind, I was assembling the pieces of his complete destruction. Phone calls were made to Marcus Johnson, the private investigator I kept on retainer for sensitive corporate matters. Email messages were sent to Patricia Williams, my personal attorney, requesting her immediate presence at the hotel. Amanda Thompson, my sister and the only family member who knew the full extent of my business empire, was contacted and asked to fly in from Seattle. Most importantly, I reached out to Marcus Hayes himself, Victoria's father and the man who'd been trying to acquire my hotels for years. The conversation was brief but illuminating. "Mr. Hayes, this is Rachel Thompson Walsh. I believe your daughter has been conducting business with my husband." There was a long pause before Marcus Hayes responded. "Mrs. Walsh, I think we need to talk." "Indeed we do. This afternoon at 3 o'clock, Grandview Metropolitan Hotel, Presidential Suite. I believe you'll find the conversation quite educational." By the time Kevin returned to the hotel, the stage would be set for the most epic revelation of his life. The woman he thought he was about to deceive would instead reveal herself as the architect of his complete downfall. The only question remaining was whether Kevin would maintain his charade until the very end, or if he'd crack under the pressure of realizing just how badly he'd underestimated his wife. At exactly 2:45 p.m., Kevin's keycard clicked in the presidential suite door. I was seated in the suite's main living area, wearing a cream-colored dress that I'd chosen specifically because it projected both elegance and authority. My hair was styled in a sleek chignon, and I wore the diamond necklace that had belonged to my grandmother, alongside the hotel empire she'd left me. Every detail of my appearance was calculated to convey the woman I truly was, not the facade I'd maintained. For 5 years, Kevin entered with the confident stride of a man who believed he was about to execute the perfect plan. His running clothes had been replaced by an expensive charcoal suit, and he carried a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained whatever documents he intended to use in his deception. His smile was practiced and warm, the same expression he'd perfected for closing business deals. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "I hope you enjoyed your spa day. You look absolutely radiant." I remained seated, studying his face for any sign of guilt or nervousness. There was none. Kevin was completely confident in his ability to manipulate me, so secure in his belief that I was a naive trust fund recipient that he couldn't conceive of any scenario where his plan might fail. "I had a lovely morning," I replied, smoothly. "Very enlightening, actually. I learned quite a bit about business opportunities in Portland." Kevin's expression flickered almost imperceptibly, but he recovered quickly. "Business opportunities? That's a bit out of your usual wheelhouse. Isn't it, sweetheart?" The condescension in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Kevin had always spoken to me as if I were an intelligent but ultimately frivolous woman whose interests extended no further than charity events and shopping. For 5 years, I'd allowed him to maintain this illusion. Today, that was going to change. "You might be surprised by what's in my wheelhouse," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please sit down. I believe you mentioned having a surprise for our anniversary." Kevin settled into the chair, opening his leather portfolio, with theatrical flair. "I do indeed. Rachel, these 5 years have been incredible, but I think it's time we took our relationship to the next level." He withdrew a stack of documents from his portfolio, spreading them across the coffee table between us. Even upside down, I could see official letterheads, signature lines, and legal terminology. Whatever Kevin was about to propose, it involved formal paperwork that would undoubtedly give him access to assets he believed I controlled. "I've been working with some brilliant financial advisors," Kevin continued, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used with clients. "They've identified some incredible investment opportunities that could secure our future for generations. All I need is your signature on a few documents to get the process started." I leaned forward to examine the papers more closely, though I already knew what I'd find. Power of attorney documents that would give Kevin complete control over my supposed trust fund. Investment agreements that would transfer my assets into accounts he could access. Legal forms that would essentially hand over everything I owned to the man who was planning to abandon me for another woman. "These look quite comprehensive," I observed, picking up the top document. "Joint financial planning, consolidated asset management, unified investment strategies. Someone put a lot of thought into this." Kevin's confidence grew as he misinterpreted my calm reaction as compliance. "Victoria Hayes, my business partner, designed the entire portfolio. She's brilliant with complex financial structures. This arrangement will maximize our earning potential while minimizing tax liability." There. It was. Victoria's name, mentioned casually as if she were simply a professional colleague rather than the woman Kevin had been kissing outside a romantic restaurant just hours earlier. The ease with which he lied to my face was almost impressive in its audacity. "Victoria Hayes," I repeated thoughtfully. "I'd love to meet her sometime. She sounds like exactly the kind of woman who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to take it." Something in my tone must have registered with Kevin, because his practiced smile faltered slightly. For the first time since entering the suite, he looked at me with genuine attention rather than dismissive confidence. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the suite door. Kevin glanced toward the sound with confusion. "Were you expecting someone?" he asked. "Actually, yes," I replied, rising from my chair. "I took the liberty of inviting a few people to join our anniversary celebration. I thought it was time you met some individuals who've been important to my life." I opened the door to reveal Robert Chen, the hotel's general manager, accompanied by Patricia Williams, my attorney. Behind them stood Marcus Johnson, the private investigator whose services I'd retained for sensitive matters, and Amanda Thompson, my sister, who'd flown in from Seattle on 2 hours' notice. Kevin stared at the group with growing alarm. This wasn't part of his script. His carefully orchestrated anniversary surprise was being derailed by variables he couldn't control or understand. "Kevin," I said, my voice taking on an authority he'd never heard before, "I'd like you to meet some people. This is Patricia Williams, my personal attorney. Marcus Johnson, who handles security and investigations for my business interests. And of course, you remember my sister Amanda." Amanda stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd never liked Kevin, sensing something artificial about his charm from the moment I'd introduced them. Over the years, she'd grown, increasingly concerned about his influence on my life and my decision to hide my true identity from him. "Kevin?" Amanda said coolly. "What an interesting way to spend your anniversary weekend." "I'm sorry," Kevin said, rising from his chair, "but I don't understand what's happening here. Rachel, we were having a private conversation about our financial future." "Oh, we're definitely going to discuss finances," I replied, moving to stand behind the chair I'd been occupying. "But first, I think you should meet one more guest." Another knock at the door revealed the person Kevin least expected to see. Marcus Hayes entered the suite with the bearing of a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, he carried himself with the confidence that came from building a business empire through decades of strategic thinking and calculated risks. Kevin's face went completely white as he recognized Victoria's father. The leather portfolio slipped from his hands, scattering documents across the floor as he struggled to comprehend how Marcus Hayes had come to be in our hotel suite. "Mr. Hayes," Kevin stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I was invited," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of controlled anger, "by someone who thought I should know what my daughter has been up to for the past 8 months. I moved to the center of the room, positioning myself where everyone could see me clearly. The moment had arrived to shed the persona I'd maintained for 5 years and reveal the woman I'd always been. "Kevin," I began, my voice steady and clear, "you've spent our entire marriage believing you were married to a simple trust fund recipient, a beautiful, wealthy, but ultimately harmless woman who needed your guidance and protection to navigate the complex world of business and finance." Kevin said nothing, but his breathing had become shallow and rapid as he began to realize that the foundation of his assumptions was cracking beneath him. "You've made decisions about our relationship based on the belief that you were the successful partner, the one with real business acumen and professional connections. You saw me as an asset to be managed rather than an equal to be respected." I walked to the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, gesturing toward the Portland skyline spread out below us. "What you never knew, Kevin, is that the woman you've been condescending to for 5 years owns the building we're standing in. She owns 3 other hotels visible from this window. She inherited a regional hotel chain at 21 and transformed it into the largest hospitality empire in the Pacific Northwest." The silence in the room was deafening. Kevin's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he struggled to process what I was telling him. "Rachel Thompson Walsh," I continued, turning back to face him, "is the CEO and majority owner of Grandview Hotels and Resorts. She employs over 2,000 people across 15 properties. She sits on the boards of 3 major corporations and has been named Pacific Northwest Entrepreneur of the Year twice in the past decade." Patricia Williams stepped forward, opening her own briefcase. "Mrs. Walsh asked me to bring documentation of her business holdings, just in case anyone questioned the scope of her empire. She spread financial statements, property deeds, and corporate filings across the coffee table, covering Kevin's fraudulent documents with proof of my actual net worth. The numbers were staggering, even to those who knew my success. Hotel properties worth hundreds of millions of dollars, investment portfolios that generated more income in a month than Kevin's firm earned in a year. Assets that dwarfed everything Kevin had ever imagined. "This is impossible," Kevin whispered, sinking back into his chair. "You volunteer at art museums. You spend your days shopping and having lunch with friends. You don't know anything about business." "I know enough about business to recognize corporate espionage when I see it," I replied. "Marcus, would you care to share what you discovered about your daughter's activities?" Marcus Hayes looked at Kevin with undisguised contempt. "My daughter Victoria has been feeding information about Grandview hotels to Kevin's firm for 8 months. Property assessments, renovation plans, occupancy rates, expansion strategies. Everything she could gather through her relationship with him." Kevin's face cycled through several emotions as the full scope of his situation became clear. He'd been used by Victoria just as he'd planned to use me. The woman he thought he was manipulating had been manipulating him all along. "But the business partnership," Kevin said weakly. "She invested in my firm. We're equal partners." "Actually," Marcus continued, "Victoria purchased 50% of Walsh and Associates using money I provided, specifically to gain access to information about Grandview properties. Every dollar she invested came from Hayes Development Group, making your firm an unknowing subsidiary of my company." Amanda stepped forward, her expression fierce with protective anger. "While you were planning to steal from my sister, you were actually helping our biggest competitor gather intelligence to use against her business." The documents Kevin had intended to use for his theft suddenly made perfect sense. Victoria hadn't designed a portfolio to steal my money. She'd created a trap to gain legal access to Grandview's most sensitive business information. Kevin wasn't the mastermind of an elaborate con. He was an unwitting accomplice in corporate espionage. "The affair was just a bonus," I said, moving closer to where Kevin sat in stunned silence. "Victoria needed someone with access to my life, someone who could observe my routines and gather information about my business activities. You were the perfect mark, Kevin. Greedy enough to be corrupted, egotistical enough to believe you were in control, and stupid enough to never question why a woman like Victoria would be interested in a man like you." Kevin's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. "You can't talk to me like that," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "I'm your husband. We're partners. Whatever game you're playing ends now." "The only game that's ending is yours," I replied. "Marcus, did you bring what I requested?" Marcus Hayes reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope. "Photos of Kevin and Victoria together this morning. Bank records showing the movement of Hayes Development funds through Walsh and Associates. Email exchanges between Victoria and her contacts in the Cayman Islands. Everything you need to prove fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Kevin lunged for the envelope, but Marcus Johnson stepped smoothly between them. The private investigator's presence was intimidating, enough to make Kevin reconsider any physical confrontation. "You can't do this to me," Kevin said, his voice cracking with panic. "I love you, Rachel. Everything I did was for us, for our future." "Everything you did was for yourself," I corrected. "You saw me as a means to an end, just like Victoria saw you. The difference is that Victoria is actually intelligent enough to execute her plans. You're just a useful idiot who got caught." I moved to the suite's phone and dialed hotel security. "Robert, please send security to the presidential suite. We'll be escorting Mr. Walsh from the property, and he won't be returning." "Rachel, please," Kevin begged, all traces of his former arrogance gone. "We can work this out. I'll end things with Victoria. We can start over." "Kevin," I said, looking at him with something approaching pity. "You never had anything to end. Victoria was using you. I was supporting you. You contributed nothing to either relationship except your ego and your greed." Hotel security arrived within minutes, professional and discreet as they always were when handling sensitive situations. Kevin tried one last desperate appeal as they prepared to escort him from the suite. "You'll regret this, Rachel. Without me, you're nothing. You need me." I looked at him standing there in his expensive suit, surrounded by security guards in the hotel I owned, still believing he had some kind of power over me. "Kevin," I said quietly, "I built an empire while you thought I was playing dress up. I outmaneuvered corporate competitors while you believed I was shopping for shoes. I've been protecting and growing generational wealth while you were planning to steal pocket change. The only thing I needed from you was a reason to stop pretending to be less than I am." As security escorted Kevin toward the elevator, he turned, back one final time. "What about Victoria? What about Hayes Development?" "Victoria and her father are about to discover that corporate espionage has consequences," I replied. "Especially when you target someone who owns more lawyers than you have employees." The elevator doors closed on Kevin's shocked face, and suddenly, the presidential suite felt lighter, as if a oppressive weight had been lifted from the air. Amanda was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe you kept up that charade for 5 years. How did you stand pretending to be helpless when you're one of the most powerful women in the Pacific Northwest?" "I thought I was protecting what we had," I admitted. "I was afraid that if Kevin knew who I really was, he'd feel threatened or inadequate. Instead, by hiding my strength, I enabled him to see me as a victim." Patricia Williams began collecting the scattered documents from the coffee table. "What would you like me to do about Mr. Walsh's attempted fraud? We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges." I walked to the window again, looking out at the city where I'd built my legacy. Somewhere out there, Kevin was probably calling Victoria, desperate to salvage their plan, or at least escape with whatever assets they could still access. They had no idea that their scheme had been exposed before it could even be executed. "File a restraining order to keep Kevin away from all Grandview properties," I said. "Freeze any accounts associated with Walsh and Associates, and prepare a civil suit for attempted fraud and conspiracy." "What about the criminal charges?" Marcus Johnson asked. I considered the question carefully. Kevin had tried to steal from me, but his attempt had failed so completely that pursuing criminal prosecution seemed almost redundant. More importantly, I had bigger targets to focus on. "Let's see how cooperative Kevin becomes when he realizes the scope of the legal trouble he's facing," I said. "Victoria and Hayes Development are the real threats. Kevin is just a pawn who's outlived his usefulness." Marcus Hayes had been quiet throughout Kevin's removal, but now he stepped forward with something approaching respect in his expression. "Mrs. Walsh," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. My daughter's actions were unethical and illegal. Hayes Development had no official knowledge of her corporate espionage activities." I studied his face, looking for any sign that he was lying. Marcus Hayes was a formidable businessman who'd built his empire through aggressive acquisition strategies and fierce competition. It was entirely possible that he'd known about Victoria's activities and was now trying to distance himself from her failures. "Your daughter spent 8 months infiltrating my personal life through my husband," I said. "She gathered confidential business information, attempted financial fraud, and conspired to damage my company's competitive position. Whether you knew about it officially or not, Mr. Hayes, Victoria learned these tactics somewhere." Marcus nodded, slowly, accepting the implicit accusation. "You're right. Victoria has always been ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. I taught her to see business as warfare, to view competitors as enemies to be defeated rather than respected. Her actions toward you reflect poorly on my parenting and my leadership." "What do you intend to do about it?" Amanda asked, her protective instincts still sharp. "Victoria will resign from Hayes Development immediately," Marcus replied. "All information she gathered about Grandview hotels will be turned over to your attorneys, and Hayes Development will end any acquisition plans targeting your properties." I appreciated his directness, but I wasn't satisfied with simply reactive measures. That's a start, I said. But I think we can do better than just ending this. Conflict. Mr. Hayes, how would you feel about turning competition into collaboration? The suggestion clearly surprised him, but Marcus Hayes didn't reach his level of success by being slow to recognize opportunity. What do you have in mind? Your company specializes in luxury residential development. Mine specializes in hospitality management. Portland is growing rapidly, and there's room for projects that combine both our expertise. Mixed-use developments with residential units and boutique hotels. Urban properties that offer both temporary and permanent luxury accommodations. Patricia. Williams looked at me with admiration. Even in the midst of exposing my husband's betrayal, I was thinking strategically about business opportunities. This was who I really was, a woman who could turn conflict into profit, who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. You're suggesting a partnership between our companies? Marcus asked. I'm suggesting that Portland's real estate market is big enough for both our companies to succeed without undermining each other. Victoria's espionage failed because she assumed business had to be warfare. I'm proposing we prove that cooperation can be more profitable than conflict. Marcus extended his hand toward me, and I shook it firmly. Mrs. Walsh, he said, I believe this is the beginning of a very productive relationship. As the afternoon sunlight slanted through the presidential suite's windows, I realized that Kevin's betrayal had given me something unexpected, the freedom to stop hiding who I really was. For 5 years, I'd diminished myself to make him feel important. Now, standing in my own hotel, surrounded by people who respected my actual accomplishments, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The woman Kevin had tried to deceive was gone forever. In her place stood the CEO who'd built an empire, the entrepreneur who turned challenges into opportunities, and the leader who was ready to show the world exactly what she was capable of achieving. The first wave of consequences arrived before sunset that same day. Lisa Martinez called as I stood on the presidential suite's balcony, watching Portland's evening light paint the Columbia River in shades of copper and gold. She'd been monitoring police scanners and courthouse filings from her newsroom at the Portland Tribune, tracking the legal earthquake that Kevin's exposure had triggered. Rachel, you need to see the evening news, Lisa said without preamble. Channel 8 is running a breaking story about corporate espionage in Portland's hospitality industry. Someone leaked the whole story. I turned on the suite's television to find a reporter standing outside the very hotel where I now lived. The chyron read, Local CEO exposes husband's corporate espionage scheme, as the anchorwoman detailed how an unnamed hotel executive had uncovered a conspiracy involving industrial espionage, marital fraud, and attempted theft. The scheme allegedly involved Hayes Development Group, Walsh and Associates Financial, and a complex web of personal relationships designed to steal trade secrets from Portland's largest hotel chain, the reporter explained. Sources close to the investigation suggest the conspiracy was discovered during what was supposed to be a romantic anniversary celebration. The irony was delicious. Kevin had planned this weekend to be his grand finale, the moment when he'd disappear with my assets and Victoria Hayes. Instead, it had become the public revelation of his stupidity and greed. By tomorrow morning, every business leader in Portland would know that Kevin Walsh had been played by a smarter criminal while attempting to commit crimes of his own. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, business associates, and board members who'd heard various versions of the story. Patricia Williams fielded most of the legal inquiries while I focused on the strategic implications of going public with my real identity after 5 years of deliberate obscurity. Amanda had remained at the hotel after Kevin's removal, and she joined me on the balcony as the Portland skyline began to twinkle with evening lights. My sister had always been more direct than I was, less willing to compromise her authentic self for the comfort of others. How does it feel? She asked, settling into one of the balcony's leather chairs. Finally being able to stop pretending. You're someone else? I considered the question as I watched traffic move through the streets below. For 5 years, I'd lived a carefully constructed lie, hiding my accomplishments and dimming my intelligence to avoid threatening Kevin's fragile ego. The relief of dropping that facade was almost overwhelming. Liberating, I admitted, and terrifying. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be completely honest about who I am. "What are you going to do about the business?" Amanda asked. "Now that everyone knows you own Grandview Hotels, you can't exactly go back to pretending you're just a socialite with too much time on her hands." She was right, of course. The revelation of my identity would require a complete restructuring of my public persona. No more anonymous board meetings or behind-the-scenes decision-making. No more letting male executives take credit for my strategies or innovations. The woman who'd built an empire while pretending to be powerless would now have to own her success publicly. Over the next several hours, I began making the calls that would reshape both my personal and professional life. The first was to the board of directors of Grandview Hotels, formally announcing that I would be stepping into the public-facing CEO role that I'd technically held for years, but had never publicly claimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began the emergency board meeting I'd called for 8 p.m. "Effective immediately, I'll be transitioning from my current advisory role to active chief executive leadership of Grandview Hotels and Resorts." The board, members participating via video conference from their respective locations, showed various degrees of surprise despite having worked with me for years. They'd known I was the owner, of course, but most had assumed I preferred to remain in the background while others handled day-to-day operations. "Rachel," said Margaret Foster, our longtime board chair, "are you certain you want to take on the public scrutiny that comes with high-profile corporate leadership? You've been very effective working behind the scenes." "I'm certain, Margaret. Recent events have made it clear that hiding my capabilities doesn't protect anyone. In fact, it creates vulnerabilities that our competitors have attempted to exploit." I outlined my vision for Grandview's future, including the potential partnership with Hayes Development that I'd proposed to Marcus Hayes. The board was intrigued by the possibilities, especially the mixed-use development projects that could expand our market reach into residential luxury properties. "There's another matter we need to address," I continued. "Walsh and Associates Financial has been providing consulting services to several of our properties. Given recent developments, we'll be terminating that relationship immediately and conducting a comprehensive audit of any advice or recommendations they've provided." The implications were significant. Kevin had been positioned as my trusted advisor on various hotel investments and renovations. If he'd been feeding information to Victoria, Hayes all along, then every recommendation he'd made needed to be scrutinized for potential sabotage or misdirection. By 10 p.m., I'd restructured my entire professional identity. Press releases were being prepared to announce my transition to active CEO leadership. Corporate communications teams were crafting messaging that would position the leadership change as a strategic expansion rather than a response to scandal. Legal teams were preparing for the inevitable challenges that would come from competitors who'd grown comfortable dealing with a supposedly passive heiress. The personal consequences were equally complex. As word spread through Portland's social circles, my phone filled with messages from friends and acquaintances who were recalibrating their understanding of who I was. Some expressed admiration for my business acumen. Others seemed offended that I'd hidden my success from them. A few revealed their own secrets, admitting that they'd also been living carefully constructed lies to avoid judgment or unwanted attention. Lisa arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m. with a bottle of champagne and a folder full of newspaper clippings. "You're officially famous," she announced, settling into the suite's living area. "The story hit the wire services an hour ago. By tomorrow morning, business journals across the country will be covering the Portland hotel heiress who exposed corporate espionage through her cheating husband." I poured champagne into 2 crystal glasses, noting that even this simple action felt different now. I wasn't pretending to be a woman who appreciated luxury. I was a woman who'd earned it through years of strategic thinking and calculated risks. "What's the tone of the coverage?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Mixed," Lisa replied, spreading newspaper printouts across the coffee table. "The business press loves the corporate intrigue angle. The lifestyle magazines are fascinated by the secret identity story. The feminist blogs are calling you a hero for refusing to be victimized by a manipulative husband." She handed me a printout from a prominent business journal. The headline read, "Hidden in Plain Sight: How Rachel Thompson Built a Hotel Empire While Playing the Perfect Wife." The article was respectful, but clearly fascinated by the contradiction between my public persona and private achievements. "There are a few negative pieces," Lisa continued. "Some columnists are questioning why you felt the need to hide your success in the first place. A couple of business writers are suggesting that your secrecy raises questions about transparency in corporate leadership." I'd expected criticism, though it still stung to read it. The articles questioning my decision to hide my identity missed the fundamental reality of what it meant to be a successful woman in a male-dominated industry. Kevin's reaction to discovering my true accomplishments had proven exactly why I'd felt the need to hide them. Men like him couldn't handle being married to women more successful than themselves. "What about Kevin?" I asked. "Any word on where he ended up?" Lisa's expression grew grim. "He checked into a downtown motel about 6 hours ago. Apparently, Victoria Hayes cut off all contact with him the moment news of the investigation broke. His business accounts have been frozen pending the fraud investigation, and several clients have already canceled their contracts with Walsh and Associates." The speed of Kevin's downfall was almost breathtaking. This morning, he'd been a confident con artist planning to steal millions of dollars and disappear to the Cayman Islands. Tonight, he was alone in a cheap motel, abandoned by his co-conspirator and facing potential criminal charges. "Has he tried to contact you?" Lisa asked. 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, I replied, showing her my phone. "I haven't read them, and I don't plan to. Patricia Williams is handling all communication through our attorneys." Amanda rejoined us after making her own series of phone calls to family members and business associates in Seattle. News traveled fast in the Pacific Northwest's interconnected business community, and she'd been fielding questions about our family's involvement in the Grandview empire. "Mom would have been proud," Amanda said, referring to our mother who'd passed away when I was in college. "She always said you had grandmother's business instincts, but she worried you were too generous with people who didn't deserve it. Our grandmother had been a formidable woman who'd built Grandview hotels through sheer determination and strategic brilliance. She'd taught me that success required both vision and ruthlessness, the ability to see opportunities others missed and the courage to act on them decisively." Kevin's betrayal had reminded me of lessons I'd temporarily forgotten. The next morning brought a flood of media attention that confirmed my transition from anonymous heiress to public CEO. Reporters gathered outside the Grandview Metropolitan, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who dominated overnight news cycles. Financial networks requested interviews about my business philosophy and expansion plans. Industry publications wanted to feature my story as an example of successful family business succession. I held my first press conference as public CEO at noon, standing in the hotel's elegant conference room before an audience of reporters, business leaders, and curiosity seekers. The questions ranged from respectful inquiries about my business strategy to more invasive speculation about my marriage and Kevin's criminal behavior. "Mrs. Walsh," asked a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, "how long do you expect to maintain active leadership of Grandview Hotels? Will you be stepping back once this current situation is resolved?" "I'll be maintaining active leadership indefinitely," I replied firmly. Grandview Hotels has thrived under collaborative management for years, but recent events have demonstrated the value of having a clearly identified public leader who can speak authoritatively about our vision and values. "What about your husband's role in the alleged espionage scheme?" pressed a reporter from a local television station. Did you have any suspicions about his activities before this weekend? I'd prepared for this question, knowing that my answer would be scrutinized for both honesty and strategic messaging. I trusted my husband completely, which made his betrayal both personally devastating and professionally dangerous, I said. This experience has reinforced my belief that business decisions should be based on verified facts rather than personal relationships. Moving forward, Grandview Hotels will implement additional security measures to protect our proprietary information. The press conference lasted 45 minutes, establishing me as a thoughtful and decisive leader while deflecting the most intrusive questions about my personal life. By the time it ended, I felt like I'd finally stepped fully into the role I'd been avoiding for years. Marcus Hayes called that afternoon to confirm our preliminary partnership discussions. His tone was respectful but cautious, clearly aware that aligning with Grandview Hotels would now mean working with a high-profile CEO rather than a behind-the-scenes owner. Mrs. Walsh, he began, I want to reiterate Hayes Development's commitment to the collaboration we discussed yesterday. However, I feel obligated to mention that Victoria has retained her own legal counsel and is denying any involvement in corporate espionage. I wasn't surprised by Victoria's denials, though I found her strategy amusing. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including the photographs Lisa had taken of her intimate rendezvous with Kevin and the financial records showing information payments from Hayes Development through Walsh and Associates. Mr. Hayes, I replied, your daughter's legal strategy is her own concern. My focus is on building a partnership that benefits both our companies and strengthens Portland's development market. Victoria's actions were unethical and illegal, but they don't define Hayes Development's potential value as a collaborator. I appreciate your perspective, Marcus said. I've prepared a preliminary proposal for joint development projects that I'd like you to review. The first property we're considering is a waterfront site that could accommodate both luxury residential units and a boutique hotel. The conversation lasted an hour, covering financial structures, design philosophies, and market positioning for our potential partnership. By the end, I was convinced that Hayes Development could be a valuable ally despite Victoria's betrayal. Marcus Hayes was a shrewd businessman who understood that success required adapting to changing circumstances. Late that afternoon, Patricia Williams arrived with updates on the legal proceedings against Kevin and Victoria. The fraud investigation was moving quickly, with prosecutors expressing confidence that they could secure convictions on multiple charges. Kevin's attorney has reached out about a plea agreement, Patricia explained. They're willing to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. Apparently, Kevin is prepared to testify against Victoria Hayes in detail. The news didn't surprise me. Kevin had always been more follower than leader, more easily manipulated than manipulative. When faced with serious legal consequences, he'd naturally try to minimize his own exposure by providing evidence against his co-conspirator. What kind of cooperation are they offering? I asked. Complete financial records of all transactions between Walsh and Associates and Hayes Development. Email communications between Kevin and Victoria dating back to when their relationship began. Documentation of any Grandview Hotel information that Victoria specifically requested or Kevin provided. The scope of Kevin's proposed cooperation was extensive enough to ensure Victoria's conviction while potentially implicating others in Hayes Development who might have been aware of the espionage scheme. Are you interested in pursuing this plea agreement? Patricia asked. I considered the question carefully. Kevin's testimony could ensure that Victoria faced appropriate consequences for her actions, but accepting his cooperation would mean relying on the word of a man who'd spent 8 months lying to me about fundamental aspects of his life. Yes, I decided, but I want ironclad guarantees that Kevin's testimony is corroborated by documentary evidence. His word alone isn't worth much, but his records might be. As evening approached, I found myself alone in the presidential suite for the first time since Kevin's exposure. The space felt different now, No longer a luxurious prison where I hid my true identity, but a sanctuary where I could finally be completely honest about who I was. I called room service and ordered dinner from the Riverside Terrace, the same restaurant where Kevin and I had celebrated our anniversary just 2 nights ago. This time, I ate alone, savoring both the excellent food and the freedom to enjoy it, without pretending to be someone else. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Rachel, please give me a chance to explain. I know I made mistakes, but we can work this out. I love you. Kevin." I stared at the message for a long moment, marveling at Kevin's continued self-delusion. Even now, facing criminal charges and financial ruin, he believed he could charm his way back into my life. The man who'd planned to steal my assets and abandon me for another woman still thought he deserved forgiveness and another chance. I deleted the message without responding and blocked Kevin's number. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. As I prepared for bed in the hotel suite that represented everything I'd achieved, I reflected on the strange turns my life had taken in just 3 days. I'd lost a husband who'd never really loved me, gained the freedom to live authentically, and positioned my company for its most ambitious expansion in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I navigated the complexities of public leadership and corporate growth. There would be competitors who'd try to exploit any perceived weakness, business partners who'd need to adjust to my new visibility, and personal relationships that would require recalibration based on my honest identity. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I fell asleep as completely myself. Not Kevin's wife, not a trust fund socialite, not a woman hiding her light under a bushel. Just Rachel Thompson, CEO of Grandview Hotels and Resorts, ready to show the world what she was truly capable of achieving. 6 months after Kevin's spectacular downfall, I stood in the boardroom of Grandview Hotel's newly expanded headquarters, looking out at a transformed Portland skyline. The city had always been beautiful, but now I saw it through different eyes. Where once I'd hidden my influence over its development, I now openly shaped its future through strategic partnerships and innovative projects. The woman reflected in the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows bore little resemblance to the person who'd once pretended to be a simple trust fund recipient. Gone were the carefully understated outfits designed to downplay my intelligence. Instead, I wore a charcoal power suit that announced confidence and authority. My hair was styled in a sharp bob that framed my face with precision, and my jewelry spoke of success earned rather than inherited. Daniel Brooks entered the boardroom carrying 2 cups of coffee and the morning's financial reports. He'd joined Grandview Hotels 3 months ago as our chief development officer, recruited from a prestigious firm in San Francisco, specifically for his expertise in mixed-use luxury properties. What had begun as a strictly professional relationship had evolved into something more personal, though we were both careful to maintain appropriate boundaries in the workplace. The Hayes Development Partnership exceeded our Q3 projections by 18%, Daniel announced, setting a coffee cup beside my papers. The waterfront project has a waiting list for both the residential units and hotel suites before construction is even complete. I smiled as I reviewed the numbers, remembering the day Marcus Hayes had first proposed our collaboration. What had emerged from the ashes of Victoria's espionage attempt was now the most successful joint venture in Portland's recent development history. Our companies had combined Hayes Development's residential expertise with Grandview's hospitality, excellence to create properties that redefined luxury living in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus called this morning, Daniel continued, settling into the chair across from me. He wants to discuss expanding the partnership to Seattle and Vancouver. Apparently, 3 other development firms have approached him about replicating our Portland model in their markets. The growth was gratifying, but it also represented vindication of my decision to step into public leadership. For years, I'd believed that hiding my capabilities would protect my relationships and preserve peace. Instead, embracing my true identity had opened doors to opportunities I'd never imagined. My assistant knocked on the boardroom door, interrupting my thoughts. "Mrs. Walsh, your attorney is here with the final documents from the criminal proceedings." Patricia Williams entered carrying a thick folder that contained the conclusion of legal saga that had begun on my anniversary weekend. The criminal trials had proceeded exactly as she'd predicted, with Kevin's cooperation proving essential to securing convictions against Victoria Hayes and several other co-conspirators. Victoria received 8 years for corporate espionage, fraud, and conspiracy, Patricia announced, placing the sentencing documents on the conference table. Kevin's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence of 3 years, plus restitution, requirements that will keep him financially constrained for the foreseeable future. The justice felt appropriate without being vindictive. Victoria had orchestrated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that could have damaged multiple businesses if successful. Kevin had been willing to betray both his marriage and his professional ethics for personal gain. Both deserved consequences that matched their choices. "There's more," Patricia continued, her expression suggesting good news. "The investigation uncovered evidence of similar schemes targeting other hospitality companies throughout the region. Your decision to prosecute has led to a wider crackdown on corporate espionage that's already prevented millions in potential losses." I hadn't expected my personal betrayal to have such broad implications, but the revelation was satisfying. Sometimes individual acts of courage created ripple effects that benefited entire industries. Daniel reviewed the legal documents with the careful attention of someone who understood their strategic importance. As our relationship had deepened, he'd proven himself to be not just romantically compatible, but intellectually equal to the challenges of building something meaningful together. "Have you given any thought to Patricia's suggestion about writing a book?" Daniel asked. "Your story could inspire other women who are hiding their capabilities in toxic relationships." The book proposal had come from several publishers who'd approached Patricia about documenting my journey from hidden heiress to public CEO. The idea was appealing, though I worried about the personal exposure it would require. "I'm considering it," I admitted, "but only if the focus remains on business strategy and personal empowerment rather than sensational details about Kevin's betrayal." "The betrayal was just the catalyst," Daniel observed. "The real story is how you transformed a family business into a regional empire while building the confidence to live authentically." His perspective was one of the things I valued most about our relationship. Daniel saw my accomplishments clearly without being intimidated by them. Unlike Kevin, who'd needed me to be smaller to feel important, Daniel encouraged me to embrace the full scope of my ambitions. Amanda arrived for our weekly lunch meeting, a tradition we'd established to maintain family connections despite our busy schedules. My sister had been instrumental in helping me navigate the transition from anonymous owner to public leader, providing both emotional support and practical advice based on her own experience running our family's Seattle-based investments. "I have news," Amanda announced as we settled into the restaurant's private dining room. "The business school at University of Washington wants to create a case study about Grandview's transformation. They're particularly interested in analyzing how family businesses can successfully transition to next-generation leadership." The academic recognition was unexpected but welcome. Business schools had long studied family enterprises that failed during succession planning, but fewer examined companies that thrived through strategic evolution and decisive leadership changes. "What would the case study involve?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would require significant time investment. "Interviews with key stakeholders, analysis of financial performance before and after your transition to active leadership, and documentation of the strategic partnerships you've developed. They want to understand how hiding your identity initially hindered growth and how revealing it accelerated success." The research would provide valuable insights for other family business owners facing similar challenges. More importantly, it would establish Grandview Hotels as a model for successful strategic transformation rather than just a cautionary tale about corporate espionage. Lisa Martinez joined us for dessert, carrying advance copies of the article she'd written about my story for a national business magazine. As both my closest friend and a respected journalist, she'd been uniquely positioned to provide insider access while maintaining professional objectivity. "The article hits newsstands next week," Lisa announced, distributing copies of the magazine. The editors love the angle about authentic leadership in an era of corporate image management. I read through the article with growing appreciation for Lisa's skillful storytelling. She'd managed to capture both the personal drama of Kevin's betrayal and the broader business implications of my decision to step into public leadership. The piece positioned my experience as relevant to any professional who'd ever felt pressure to diminish themselves for others' comfort. "There's something else," Lisa continued, her expression growing serious. "I've been investigating Hayes Development's other business relationships, and I discovered something interesting about Victoria's activities before she targeted you." She opened her laptop and showed us financial records that revealed a pattern of similar espionage attempts targeting other successful women in business. Victoria hadn't chosen me randomly. She'd systematically identified female entrepreneurs who kept low public profiles and attempted to exploit their privacy preferences. She tried this scheme with at least 3 other women over the past 2 years, Lisa explained. A tech executive in San Francisco, a real estate developer in Denver, and a restaurant chain owner in Phoenix. In each case, Victoria used romantic relationships to gain access to proprietary business information. The revelation was both disturbing and validating. Victoria's crimes hadn't been crimes of passion or opportunity. They'd been calculated attacks on successful women who'd made themselves vulnerable by hiding their achievements. "What happened to the other victims?" Daniel asked. "Mixed results," Lisa replied. The tech executive discovered the scheme early and prosecuted successfully. The real estate developer never realized she'd been targeted and lost several million in property deals to Victoria's father. The restaurant owner chose not to prosecute to avoid public scrutiny. I felt a surge of pride in my decision to pursue justice aggressively. By refusing to be a silent victim, I'd not only protected my own interests, but potentially prevented Victoria from targeting other women in the future. That evening, Daniel and I attended the grand opening of our first joint residential hotel property with Hayes Development. The event attracted Portland's business elite, political leaders, and media representatives who were curious to see the results of our unlikely partnership. Marcus Hayes approached us during the cocktail reception, his demeanor reflecting both professional respect and personal redemption. The months since Victoria's conviction had been difficult for him, requiring a complete reevaluation of his company's culture and practices. "Rachel," he said, extending his hand with genuine warmth, "I want you to know that this partnership has been transformative for Hayes Development. Working with Grandview has elevated our standards and expanded our vision beyond anything we achieved independently." The partnership had indeed been mutually beneficial, but I appreciated Marcus's acknowledgement of its impact on his company's culture. By insisting on transparency and ethical practices in all our joint ventures, we'd helped Hayes Development evolve from an aggressive acquisition firm into a collaborative development partner. "The success speaks for itself," I replied, gesturing toward the elegant property around us. When businesses combine their strengths instead of trying to undermine each other, everyone benefits. As the evening progressed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months ago, I'd been hiding in the shadows of my own success, pretending to be powerless while secretly controlling a multi-million-dollar empire. Tonight, I stood openly as one of Portland's most influential business leaders, comfortable with both my achievements and my ambitions. The transformation hadn't been without costs. Several social acquaintances had distanced themselves after discovering my true identity, apparently uncomfortable with the idea that they'd been friends with someone more successful than they'd realized. Some business relationships had required renegotiation as partners adjusted to dealing with an active CEO rather than a passive owner. But the benefits far outweighed the challenges. My company had grown by 40% since I'd assumed public leadership. Employee satisfaction had increased as staff members gained confidence in having a visible, accessible leader. Strategic partnerships like the Hayes Development Collaboration had opened new markets and revenue streams that would have been impossible while I remained anonymous. Most importantly, I'd regained my authentic self. The woman who'd once dimmed her light to avoid threatening others had learned to shine brightly enough to illuminate opportunities for everyone around her. Daniel drove me home to the penthouse I'd purchased in one of Portland's most prestigious buildings, a far cry from the house I'd shared with Kevin where I'd felt compelled to hide my success. The new space reflected my honest identity, sophisticated without being ostentatious, comfortable without being apologetic, impressive without being defensive. "I have something to tell you," Daniel said as we stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights. "I received a job offer today. Chief Development Officer for a major hospitality group in New York." My heart clenched with unexpected anxiety. Over the past 3 months, Daniel had become more than just a romantic partner. He'd become a trusted advisor and collaborative equal who understood both my professional challenges and personal growth. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity," I managed, though my voice betrayed my concern about his potential departure. "It is," Daniel agreed, which is why I turned it down immediately. I stared at him in surprise, not sure I'd heard correctly. "You turned down a promotion in New York?" "Rachel," Daniel said, taking my hands in his, "I didn't leave San Francisco to advance my career. I came to Portland to build something meaningful with someone extraordinary. The opportunity I want isn't in New York or anywhere else. It's right here, with you, continuing to grow Grandview Hotels into something unprecedented." His words were exactly what I needed to hear, but I had to be certain he understood the implications of choosing to stay. "Daniel, building a life with me means accepting that my business will always be a central part of who I am. I won't hide my success again, not for anyone." "I wouldn't want you to," he replied firmly. "I fell in love with the woman who built an empire, not someone pretending to be less than she is. Your success doesn't intimidate me. It inspires me to be better." 6 months later, Daniel and I were married in a ceremony that perfectly reflected our authentic selves. Instead of hiding in an anonymous venue, we celebrated at the newest Grandview property, surrounded by employees, business partners, and friends who knew exactly who we were. Amanda served as my maid of honor, Lisa documented the event for posterity, and Marcus Hayes attended as both a business partner and family friend. The contrast to my anniversary weekend with Kevin couldn't have been starker. Where Kevin had planned deception and betrayal, Daniel offered honesty and partnership. Where Kevin had seen my wealth as something to exploit, Daniel viewed my success as something to celebrate and support. As I danced with my new husband in the ballroom of a hotel I owned, wearing a dress that cost more than many people's annual salary without apology, I realized that authentic happiness required authentic living. For years, I'd believed that love meant making myself smaller to accommodate others' insecurities. Now I understood that real love meant finding someone who encouraged me to be my full, complete, successful self. The business continued to thrive under my open leadership. Grandview Hotels expanded to 23 properties across 4 states, with plans for international development already in motion. The Hayes Development Partnership spawned a new division focused entirely on mixed-use luxury properties that combined hospitality and residential excellence. More importantly, my story had inspired other women to embrace their achievements openly. The book I eventually wrote became a bestseller, not because it exposed Kevin's betrayal in salacious detail, but because it provided a roadmap for transforming hidden potential into visible success. Standing in my office 1 year after Kevin's conviction, reading financial reports that showed record-breaking quarterly performance, I finally understood the lesson my grandmother had tried to teach me before her death. Success wasn't something to hide or apologize for. It was something to wield responsibly for the benefit of everyone whose lives it could improve. The woman who'd once pretended to be powerless while secretly controlling an empire had learned to be openly powerful while serving something greater than herself. Employees depended on my leadership for their livelihoods. Communities benefited from the jobs and economic growth my investments created. Industry standards improved because of the ethical practices I insisted upon in all business relationships. Kevin had tried to steal my money, but he'd inadvertently given me something far more valuable: the courage to stop hiding who I really was. His betrayal had shattered the comfortable lie I'd been living and forced me to embrace the uncomfortable truth of my own capabilities. Today, when people ask how I built Grandview Hotels into one of the Pacific Northwest's most successful hospitality companies, I tell them the truth. It wasn't built overnight through a single brilliant strategy or fortunate inheritance. It was built day by day, decision by decision, by a woman who learned to trust her instincts, value her contributions, and never again make herself smaller for someone else's comfort. The hotel where Kevin abandoned me that weekend still stands, in downtown Portland, now expanded and renovated to reflect the vision of the woman who'd always owned it, but had finally claimed it. Sometimes I walk through its lobby and remember the person I used to be, hiding in plain sight, wealthy but powerless, successful but silent. That woman is gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid of her own accomplishments. The greatest revenge, I learned, isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's becoming so authentically successful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.